What kind of neighbor picks a lock to snoop inside your home? The kind who thinks she owns the block. Karen's heels clicked on our porch that evening, her flashlight slicing through the dusk like she was starring in her own detective show. I'd only been in the neighborhood a month, but her reputation preceded her. The HOA president who wielded her clipboard like a scepter, her eyes always scanning for infractions. Our untrimmed hedges, our mailbox slightly askew. Nothing escaped her. But breaking into our house, that was a new low, even for her. I was upstairs, unpacking the last of our boxes, when I heard the front door creak open. My heart jolted. My wife, Lena, was still at work, and I wasn't expecting anyone. I crept downstairs, gripping my phone, ready to dial 911. That's when I saw her silhouette in the living room, rifling through our mail like it was her personal archive. Karen, caught red-handed, her face flushed with indignation, not shame, when I flicked on the light. "What the hell are you doing in my house?" I demanded, my voice shaking with fury. She didn't even flinch. "I'm protecting this neighborhood," she snapped, her voice sharp as a blade. "You've been ignoring my notices about your lawn. I had to make sure you weren't hiding anything, drugs, violations, anything." I was dumbfounded. She'd picked our lock because of untrimmed grass. Before I could respond, she was already on her phone, dialing the police, spinning a story about suspicious activity in our home. My home. The audacity burned in my chest, but I didn't stop her. Let her call. Let her dig her own grave. I crossed my arms and waited, the air thick with her self-righteous muttering. Minutes later, sirens wailed in the distance, and Karen's smirk grew wider, as if she'd already won. She didn't know who was about to walk through that door. Lena, my wife, wasn't just any cop. She was the kind of officer who commanded respect with a single glance, her uniform crisp, her presence unyielding. When a knock came, Karen practically skipped to answer it, ready to play the hero. But when Lena stepped inside, badge gleaming, her eyes locking onto Karen's, the room seemed to shrink. Karen's face drained of color, her mouth frozen mid-sentence. Lena's voice was calm, almost too calm. "Ma'am, I got a call about a break-in. Care to explain why you're standing in my living room?" The silence that followed was deafening. Karen stammered, her confidence crumbling like dry leaves. She tried to spin her story again, but Lena wasn't having it. Every word Karen uttered only tightened the noose she'd tied herself. I stood back, watching the woman who'd invaded our home unravel under the weight of her own arrogance. She thought she could control everything, until she couldn't. Lena's gaze never wavered, and I could see the gears turning in Karen's head, searching for an escape that didn't exist. This wasn't just about a nosy neighbor anymore. It was about power, accountability, and the moment someone realizes they've crossed a line they can't uncross. Karen had no idea what she'd set in motion, but she was about to find out. The neighborhood was small, the kind where everyone knew everyone's business, or at least thought they did. We moved here for a fresh start after years of city chaos, craving quiet streets and friendly faces. Instead, we got Karen, the self-appointed guardian of Willow Lane, who treated every minor infraction like a personal affront. Her emails about our non-compliant flower beds had started the day we moved in. I ignored them at first, thinking she'd tire herself out. But Karen didn't tire. She escalated. Notes taped to our door, complaints filed with the HOA, even whispers to neighbors about those new people. I laughed it off, but Lena wasn't amused. "She's testing us," Lena had said one night, her voice low, her cop instincts kicking in. "People like her don't stop until they're stopped." I hadn't realized how right she was until Karen crossed the threshold of our home. Now, with Lena standing there, the tables had turned. Karen's call to the police wasn't just a mistake, it was a declaration of war. And she was about to learn what happens when you pick a fight with the wrong family. Karen's hands trembled as she clutched her phone, her eyes darting between Lena and me. The living room felt like a pressure cooker, the air heavy with unspoken accusations. Lena stood tall, her badge catching the light, her expression unreadable but firm. "I'm waiting, ma'am," she said, her tone clipped, professional, the kind that made people rethink their life choices. Karen opened her mouth, then closed it, her bravado evaporating. "This is a misunderstanding," she finally managed, her voice pitching higher. "I was checking on the property. For the HOA. You know how it is. Standards must be upheld." Lena raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "Standards don't include breaking and entering." Karen flinched, but she wasn't ready to surrender. She pivoted, pointing at me. "He's been ignoring my notices. His yard is a disgrace, and I had reason to believe there was something illegal going on here." I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that made her jump. "Illegal? You broke into my house because my grass is an inch too long." Lena stepped closer, her presence filling the room. "You entered a private residence without permission. That's a crime. Care to explain what you were looking for in our mail?" Karen's eyes widened, and for the first time, I saw a real fear flicker across her face. She'd been caught, and she knew it. But Karen wasn't the type to go down quietly. She straightened, tossing her hair back, and tried to regain control. "I'm the HOA president. I have a responsibility to this community. You can't just move in and disregard the rules." Lena didn't blink. "The rules don't give you a free pass to commit felonies." The word felonies hung in the air, heavy and final. Karen's face paled further, but she doubled down, her voice rising. "You don't understand. This neighborhood has standards. People rely on me to keep things in order." It was almost pathetic, watching her cling to her self-appointed authority like a lifeline. But then came the twist, the moment that turned the confrontation into something deeper. The front door swung open, and Mrs. Ellis, our elderly neighbor, shuffled in, her cane tapping softly. Her eyes were sharp, her voice steady despite her age. "Karen, enough," she said, her words cutting through the tension like a knife. Everyone froze. Mrs. Ellis wasn't part of Karen's fan club. She was one of the few who'd stood up to her over the years. "I saw you pick that lock," she continued, her gaze unwavering. "I've been watching you bully this street for too long. You don't get to play queen anymore." Karen's mouth opened, but no words came out. Mrs. Ellis turned to Lena, her expression softening. "Officer, I'll testify if you need me to." This isn't the first time Karen's crossed a line. The room seemed to tilt. Karen's reign wasn't just unraveling. It was being exposed by someone she'd underestimated for years. Mrs. Ellis, quiet and unassuming, had been keeping tabs, waiting for the right moment. Her words carried the weight of a community fed up with Karen's tyranny. Lena nodded, her face still professional, but with a hint of respect. "Thank you, ma'am. I'll take your statement." Karen's hands dropped to her sides, her phone slipping onto the couch. For the first time, she looked small, her authority stripped away by a single witness. I felt a strange mix of vindication and pity. Karen wasn't just a nosy neighbor. She was a woman obsessed with control, and now that control was slipping through her fingers. The confrontation wasn't over, but the tide had turned. Lena was already pulling out her notepad, her movements deliberate, while Karen stood frozen, realizing the hole she'd dug was deeper than she'd ever imagined. The neighborhood's whispers were about to become shouts, and Karen was no longer the one holding the megaphone. The living room pulsed with tension as Lena scribbled Mrs. Ellis's statement, her pen moving with the precision of someone used to defusing chaos. Karen stood rooted to the spot, her eyes darting between the three of us, searching for an escape that wasn't there. The air felt electric, charged with the weight of her unraveling empire. Mrs. Ellis leaned on her cane, her frail frame belying the steel in her voice. "I've lived here 40 years, she said, her words slow but piercing. "I've seen people like you, Karen, come and go. You think you're saving the neighborhood, but you're tearing it apart." Karen's face twisted, a mix of anger and desperation. "You don't understand. I'm protecting property values. Someone has to." Her voice cracked, betraying the panic beneath her defiance. Lena looked up from her notepad, her gaze steady. "Ma'am, you can explain that at the station. Right now, you're coming with me." Karen's eyes widened, her hands flying up as if to ward off the words. "The station? You can't be serious. I'm not a criminal." But Lena was already moving, calm and methodical, gesturing toward the door. "Let's go. We'll sort this out properly." The moment was raw, almost surreal, as Karen's world began to crumble. She'd built her identity on control, on being the one who made the rules, but now she was on the wrong side of them. I watched, my anger cooling into something heavier, disappointment, maybe, or pity for someone so consumed by her own power trip. But the confrontation was far from over. As Lena guided Karen toward the door, another figure appeared in the frame. Mr. Patel, the quiet accountant from across the street. His presence was unexpected, his usual reserved demeanor replaced by a quiet fury. "I heard everything," he said, his voice low but firm. "Karen, you've been harassing my family too. Those fines for my daughter's bike on the driveway? You made her cry." The twist deepened, a ripple of rebellion spreading through the room. Mr. Patel stepped closer, his eyes locked on Karen. "You sent letters threatening to tow my car because I parked it an inch over the line. You've gone too far." Karen's face flushed, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The neighborhood was turning on her, one voice at a time. Mrs. Ellis nodded at Mr. Patel, a silent acknowledgement of their shared resolve. Lena glanced at me, a flicker of pride in her eyes, before turning back to Karen. "Sounds like we'll need more statements," she said, her tone neutral but laced with authority. Karen's hand shook as she grabbed her purse, her movements jerky, like a puppet with cut strings. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, but her voice lacked conviction. She was cornered, and she knew it. The street outside was starting to stir, neighbors drawn by the flashing lights of Lena's cruiser. Faces peered from windows, and a few stepped onto their porches, their whispers carrying in the evening air. Karen's reign had been built on fear and intimidation, but now the community she'd claimed to protect was closing ranks against her. As Lena led her outside, Karen's head bowed, her earlier swagger replaced by a brittle silence. I followed, my heart pounding, not from anger, but from the weight of what was unfolding. This wasn't just about a break-in anymore. It was about a neighborhood reclaiming its voice. Karen had underestimated us all, and now she was facing the consequences of her own making. The night air was cool, the streetlights casting long shadows as Lena opened the cruiser door. Karen hesitated, her eyes scanning the growing crowd, searching for an ally and finding none. The confrontation had reached its peak, and the woman who'd once ruled Willow Lane was about to discover just how fragile her throne had always been. The cruiser's red and blue lights painted the street in stark contrasts, turning Willow Lane into a stage where Karen's downfall played out for all to see. Neighbors clustered on their lawns, their murmurs growing louder as Lena guided Karen toward the car. The HOA president, once untouchable, now looked small, her shoulders hunched, her eyes avoiding the crowd. I stood on the porch, my arms crossed, watching the scene unfold like a storm finally breaking. Lena's voice cut through the night, calm but commanding. "Ma'am, get in the vehicle." Karen hesitated, her hand gripping the doorframe, as if clinging to the last shred of her authority. "This is a mistake," she whispered, but no one was listening. The neighborhood had had enough. Mr. Patel stepped forward, his daughter clinging to his side, her eyes wide but unafraid. "You owe us an apology," he said, his voice steady. "Not just them, but all of us." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Mrs. Ellis nodded, her cane tapping the ground for emphasis. Karen's gaze darted around, searching for a lifeline, but the faces staring back were no longer cowed. They were done with her rules, her fines, her relentless need to control. The tension snapped when a new voice joined the fray. Tommy, the teenager who mowed lawns for extra cash. "You tried to find my mom for my skateboard in the garage," he called out, his voice cracking with indignation. The crowd grew bolder, more voices rising, each one a brick in the wall, closing in on Karen. She'd ruled through fear, but fear only works until people stop being afraid. Lena raised a hand, silencing the crowd with a single gesture. "We'll handle this at the station," she said, her tone final. Karen slid into the cruiser, her face a mask of defiance and dread. The door shut with a heavy thud, and for a moment, The street was silent. Then the whispers started again, softer now, tinged with relief. Lena turned to me, her eyes softening for a split second before she climbed into the driver's seat. I stayed on the porch, watching the cruiser pull away, Karen's silhouette slumped in the back. The neighborhood felt different, lighter, as if a weight had been lifted. But the story wasn't over. Back inside, Mrs. Ellis sat on our couch, sipping water I'd offered her, her hand steady despite her age. "She's been like this for years," she said, her voice low. "Always meddling, always judging. But no one stood up to her until now." Mr. Patel joined us, his daughter asleep on his shoulder. "We should have done this sooner," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "She made us feel like we didn't belong." I nodded, my anger giving way to something deeper, a sense of community forged in the heat of this moment. Karen's actions had backfired, uniting the people she'd tried to divide. But her downfall wasn't just about one night. It was the culmination of years of resentment, of neighbors swallowing their frustrations until they couldn't anymore. The next morning, the neighborhood buzzed with talk. Karen's arrest was the headline, but the real story was the shift in power. People started speaking up, sharing their own run-ins with her. Fines for minor infractions, threats over petty disputes. The HOA meeting that week was packed, not with Karen's loyalists, but with residents ready to rewrite the rules. Karen's absence left a void, and for the first time, it felt like we could fill it with something better. Her scepter was broken, and Willow Lane was ready to move on without her. The days after Karen's arrest were a blur of whispers and newfound courage. Willow Lane felt alive, as if the street itself had taken a deep breath after years of holding it in. Neighbors who'd once kept their heads down now waved to each other, their conversations no longer tinged with caution. The HOA's iron grip was loosening, and people were starting to dream of what the neighborhood could be without Karen's shadow looming over it. I walked through the street one morning, noticing small changes, a flower bed defiantly overflowing with color, a kid's bike left on a driveway without fear of a fine. It was subtle, but it felt like freedom. At home, Lena and I sat at the kitchen table, her uniform draped over a chair, a reminder of a night that changed everything. "She's been charged," Lena said, stirring her coffee. "Breaking and entering, plus a few other counts from neighbors' complaints." I nodded, unsurprised but relieved. Karen's actions had consequences, and for once, they weren't being swept under the rug. But the victory wasn't just legal, it was personal. The neighborhood was waking up, and we were part of it. Mrs. Ellis stopped by later that day, her eyes bright with purpose. "We're holding a vote to dissolve the HOA," she said, her voice firm, "or at least replace it with something fairer." I smiled, imagining Karen's reaction to her empire being dismantled. Mr. Patel was already organizing a community meeting, and even Tommy, the skateboard kid, was passing out flyers. The rebellion wasn't loud, but it was relentless, a quiet insistence that things could be different. Yet, there was a lingering unease. Karen wasn't gone. She was out on bail, holed up in her house across the street. Neighbors reported seeing her curtains twitch, her silhouette pacing behind them. She wasn't at the HOA meeting, but her absence felt like a storm cloud waiting to burst. I wondered if she'd try to fight back, to reclaim the control she'd lost. Lena sensed my worry. "She's not done," she said one night, her voice low. "People like her don't let go easily." She was right. A week later, a letter arrived, typed and unsigned, slipped under our door. It was a venomous rant, accusing us of destroying the neighborhood's values. I recognized Karen's tone immediately. Her obsession with order, her refusal to see herself as the problem. Lena read it, her jaw tight, and tossed it aside. "She's desperate," she said, "but she's alone now." The letter was a last gasp, but it reminded us that change wasn't complete. Karen's influence lingered in the doubts of a few neighbors, the ones who'd bought into her vision of perfection. We had to keep pushing, not just against her, but for something better. The community meeting was a turning point. Mrs. Ellis spoke first, her voice carrying the weight of decades on Willow Lane. We don't need someone telling us how to live, she said, her eyes sweeping the room. We need trust, not rules. Mr. Patel followed, proposing a new council, one that listened instead of dictated. The room erupted in applause, and for the first time, I felt like we were building something real. Karen's downfall had sparked a fire, and it was spreading. By the end of the night, the HOA was officially dissolved, replaced by a volunteer committee focused on community, not control. I looked around at the faces, old, young, new, and lifelong residents, and saw hope. Karen's reign was over, but the work of rebuilding had just begun. The neighborhood settled into a new rhythm, one where front yards bloomed with personality and kids played without fear of fines. The absence of Karen's clipboard felt like a weight lifted, but her presence still haunted Willow Lane. Her house stood quiet, curtains drawn, but the occasional glimpse of her pacing reminded us she hadn't vanished. I wonder what she was planning, retreat or revenge. Lena, ever the cop, kept a watchful eye, her instincts honed from years of reading people. She's not the type to let go, she said one evening, her voice low as we sat on our porch. But she's got no power left. I wanted to believe her, but the unsigned letter still nagged at me, its venom a reminder of Karen's refusal to surrender. The community, though, was moving forward. Mrs. Ellis and Mr. Patel led the new council, organizing block parties and cleanup days that felt more like celebrations than chores. Tommy's skateboards became a fixture on the street, his laughter mingling with the chatter of neighbors who now knew each other's names. It was a small victory, but it mattered. Yet, the past has a way of clawing back. One morning, a petition appeared online, posted on the neighborhood's social media group. It called for reinstating the HOA, complete with Karen's old rules. The language was polished, but the tone was unmistakable. Her hand was all over it. Comments poured in, some supportive, but most were outraged. She's trying to come back, Mr. Patel said at an emergency meeting, his voice tight. We can't let her. The group agreed, but the petition stirred unease, a reminder that not everyone wanted change. A few neighbors, loyal to Karen's vision of order, rallied behind her. The divide wasn't deep, but it was enough to make us realize the fight wasn't over. Lena and I decided to confront the issue head-on. We invited the petition supporters to a community meeting, hoping to bridge the gap. The night was tense, with Karen herself showing up, her chin high, her eyes blazing with defiance. She stood at the back, arms crossed, as Mrs. Ellis opened the discussion. This is our home, Mrs. Ellis said, her voice steady. We're stronger together, not divided by rules that hurt more than they help. Karen stepped forward, her voice sharp. You're letting this place fall apart. Standards matter. You'll regret this when property values tank. Her words were met with silence, then a soft rebuttal from Tommy's mom. We're happier now. That's worth more than your rules. The room murmured agreement, and Karen's face tightened. She hadn't expected resistance to be so unified. Lena stood, her presence commanding attention. This isn't about property values, she said. It's about respect. You lost that when you broke into our home. The crowd nodded, and Karen's defiance faltered. She left without another word, her petition crumbling under the weight of a community that had found its voice. The meeting ended with plans for a neighborhood garden, a symbol of growth over control. As we walked home, Lena squeezed my hand. We did this, she said, her voice soft but proud. Karen's shadow was fading, and Willow Lane was finally ours. Willow Lane blossomed in the weeks that followed, each day a small rebellion against the old ways. The neighborhood garden took shape, with kids planting sunflowers and neighbors sharing tools and laughter. The street felt alive, no longer stifled by Karen's rules. Her house remained quiet, the petition forgotten, her influence reduced to a cautionary tale. Lena and I walked the block one evening, her hand in mine, the air warm with summer's promise. This is what we wanted, I said, watching Tommy skate past, his grin infectious. Lena nodded, her eyes scanning the street, always alert but softer now. It's not perfect, she said, but it's home. The community had found its strength, not in control, but in connection. Mrs. Ellis's stories of the old days became a staple at block parties, her wisdom grounding us. Mr. Patel's daughter painted murals on the garden fence, each stroke a defiance of the beige conformity Karen had championed. Even the holdouts, the few who'd supported her petition, started joining in, drawn by the warmth of a neighborhood that welcomed them without judgment. Karen herself was rarely seen. Rumors swirled. She was selling her house, moving away. I didn't care where she went, only that she no longer held sway over us. Her downfall had taught us something vital. Power isn't in rules or fear, but in standing together. One night, as we sat on our porch, Mrs. Ellis stopped by, her cane tapping softly. "You two changed things," she said, her eyes bright. "You showed us we could." I shook my head, giving credit where it was due. "You started it, Mrs. Ellis. We just followed." She smiled, a rare softness in her weathered face. "Maybe, but it's yours now." Her words stayed with me, a reminder that change starts with one voice, one moment, one stand against what's wrong. Lena leaned against me, her warmth steadying me. "We're not done," she said, her voice quiet but sure. "There's always more to do." She was right. A neighborhood isn't built in a day, but in countless small acts of courage and kindness. Willow Lane was proof of that. As the stars came out, I looked at the street, our street, and felt a swell of pride. We'd faced Karen's tyranny, her break-in, her desperate grasp for control, and we'd come out stronger. The chalk on the sidewalk had faded, but its message lingered. Karen's call had backfired, and in its wake, we'd found something better. A community that chose trust over fear, connection over control. We weren't perfect, but we were together, and that was enough.